Question 1. In light of recent developments, a multinational corporation has recently integrated RSA Authentication Manager 8.0 with both on-premises and cloud-based applications. However, users experience inconsistent access behavior when authenticating to cloud services. Analysis reveals discrepancies between policies applied on-premises and those on the Cloud Authentication Service (CAS). What should the administrator prioritize to resolve? Inconsistency. A. Enabling silent collection for all risk-based access policies across both systems. B. Creating parallel security domains for cloud-based applications to isolate policies. C. Ensuring consistent access policies are defined in both Authentication Manager and CAS. D. Assigning multiple identity sources to synchronize user credentials across realms. Answer. Correct answer. C. Ensuring consistent access policies are defined in both Authentication Manager and CAS. Explanation. In RSA SecurID 8.0 deployments using both on-premises Authentication Manager and Cloud Authentication Service (CAS), policy misalignment is a known issue. While both systems support access policies, they must be configured consistently to ensure predictable authentication behavior. Access policies govern how users authenticate and what methods, token, biometrics, etc. are allowed. RSA's official documentation emphasizes the importance of policy harmonization, especially when identity routers (IDRs) are involved. Silent collection and identity sources (D) play roles but don't solve policy conflicts. Question 2. Through the lens of secure token lifecycle management, which of the following actions should be taken when a hardware token is reported lost by a user who still requires access to critical systems without delay? A. Disable the lost token and wait for a new token shipment. B. Generate a temporary password using the security console. C. Assign a software token as an immediate replacement. D. Place the user into a bypass group with unrestricted access. Answer. Correct answer. B. Generate a temporary password using the security console. Explanation. RSA Authentication Manager provides emergency access via temporary passwords. When a token is lost, especially hardware ones that can't be replaced immediately, an admin can issue a temporary password, which acts as a one-time password. This balances access continuity and security. Assigning a software token C might require registration and user configuration. Bypass groups D may violate zero trust principles and expose risks. RSA documentation under token replacement and emergency access stresses using temporary passwords for such cases. Question 3. Considering the evidence, Lisa, an RSA administrator, is performing a bulk update of user token assignments for a large enterprise. She notices a substantial number of failed assignments. A quick audit shows these users are not linked to any identity source. What is the most effective corrective action? A. Resynchronize all tokens assigned during the update. B. Update the user entries manually in the internal database. C. Link users to a valid identity source and retry the assignment. D. Increase the timeout threshold for identity source lookups. Answer. Correct answer. C. Link users to a valid identity source and retry the assignment. Explanation. In RSA Authentication Manager 8.0, identity sources like LDAP Active Directory are critical for resolving user identities during token assignments. If users aren't linked to any source, the system cannot validate them, causing assignment failures. Manually updating the database B is unsupported and risky. RSA's Identity Source Configuration Guide stresses that user token associations require resolvable identity source links. Increasing timeouts D doesn't solve the root problem, and resynchronizing A is irrelevant for unassigned tokens. Question 4. Among the various troubleshooting techniques, what is the primary function of audit logs within RSA Authentication Manager 8.0 when investigating failed authentication attempts? A. To generate forensic token usage reports. B. To verify synchronization status between agents. C. To provide detailed transaction histories for user authentications. D. To reset the system PIN for affected users. Answer. Correct answer. C. To provide detailed transaction histories for user authentications. Explanation. Audit logs. The RSA Authentication Manager track authentication events, successes, and failures, including timestamps, agent hosts, and user identifiers. This is essential in diagnosing access issues and understanding why authentications fail, be it due to expired tokens, invalid pins, or misconfigured agents, while report status, tools, and resetting pins. D is an admin action. Audit logs provide real-time diagnostic data as outlined in RSA's Audit and Monitoring Framework. Question 5. To illustrate this point, Mr. Ahmed, a security administrator, attempts to set up a Radius client with RSA Authentication Manager 8.0 or VPN access. However, the client continually fails to authenticate users. Further inspection reveals the shared secret was incorrectly configured on the RSA side, or protocol level issue is most likely the result. A. Encrypted ops failing checksum validation. B. Radius requests being silently dropped due to authentication mismatch. C. IPsec tunnel collapsing due to authentication loop. D. Agent host configuration blocking Radius traffic. Answer. Correct answer. B. Radius requests being silently dropped due to authentication mismatch. Explanation. In Radius authentication, the shared secret is a key component for encrypting and validating requests. If mismatched, RSA Authentication Manager will discard Radius requests without response, leading to silent failures. This is a security feature to prevent the enumeration or brute force attempts. RSA's Radius Authentication Guide emphasizes ensuring both the client and server share the same exact secret. IPsec tunnels, C, and opt checksums, A, are unrelated, and agent host configs, D, affect different communication layers. Question 6. During the process of managing administrative roles, what mechanism RSA Authentication Manager 8.0 allows administrators to limit control over specific sets of users or agents? A. Role-based access controls RBAC tied to LDAP groups. B. Security domains with delegated administrative permissions. C. Self-service console configurations. D. Identity source filters. Answer. Correct answer. B. Security domains with delegated administrative permissions. Explanation. Security domains allow logical grouping of users, tokens, and agents. By delegating administrative roles to specific domain, RSA Authentication Manager ensures that an administrator only manages entities within their assigned domain. This is central to least privilege access models and is detailed in the Security Console Administration Guide. RBAC-A is relevant but does not enforce domain segmentation. Self-service console C is for end users and identity source filters. D affect user discovery, not control delegation. Question 7. From a practical standpoint, when configuring a new software token in RSA Authentication Manager 8.0, which of the following must be ensured to allow successful token activation on the user's mobile device? A. PIN policies must be disabled before issuing tokens. B. Device must support HTML browser for token import. C. Token must be distributed using a UID or activation link. D. User must change their network password before activation. Answer. Correct answer. C. Token must be distributed using a UID or activation link. Explanation. RSA software tokens, especially secured mobile apps, require QR codes or activation links to be imported into user devices securely. This ensures both secure transmission and ease of deployment. RSA Authentication Manager includes token distribution workflows for this purpose. HTML support B isn't necessary, and PIN policies A are configurable but not required for activation. Requiring password change D is unrelated. This process is well documented in RSA's Software Token Deployment Guide. Question 8. One might argue that assigning multiple tokens to a user increases redundancy. However, what is a critical operational consideration when a user is assigned more than one active token in RSA Authentication Manager 8.0a? All tokens must share the same seed record for consistency. B. Users must authenticate using both tokens simultaneously. C. The system will automatically prioritize the token issued first. D. Users must specify which token to use if multiple are valid. Answer. Correct answer D. Users must specify which token to use if multiple are valid. Explanation. RSA Authentication Manager allows users to have multiple active tokens, but during login, the user must use one specific token. The system doesn't prioritize the tokens nor require simultaneous use. User education is essential in such cases, especially in hybrid hardware-software scenarios. The authentication flow documentation details that authentication will succeed as long as one valid token is used. Using both B or shared seed, say, is invalid, and token order C is not system defined. Question 9. Examining the consequences of misconfigured authentication agents, Mr. Delgado configures an agent host for a new RSA-protected application. However, users report that even valid tokens are being denied. Logs show no record of the agent's authentication requests. What is the most plausible cause? A. The agent's hostname is incorrectly defined in the agent host record. B. Users are using expired ops for authentication. C. Authentication Manager has reached its licensing limit. D. The agent is pointing to an outdated certificate authority. Answer. Correct answer A. The agent's hostname is incorrectly defined in the agent host record. Explanation. In RSA Authentication Manager, agent host entries must match the IP or a hostname used by authentication requests. If the hostname is incorrect or missing, Authentication Manager will not recognize or log the request, leading to denials. Licensing issues. C. Produce separate error messages and certificate authorities. D. Relate TETI. Communication, not token validation. Op expiration. B. Would result in logged failures, not total absence of logs. The agent host configuration guide highlights this requirement clearly. Question 10. In the context of silent collection for risk-based authentication (RBA), what is the primary purpose of enabling silent collection for end users in RSA Authentication Manager 8.0? A. To allow anonymous authentication attempts before registration. B. To collect behavioral data for building risk profiles without user disruption. C. To create default security questions for new users. D. To bypass token authentication temporarily. Answer. Correct answer B. To collect behavioral data for building risk profiles without user disruption. Explanation. Silent collection enables RSA Authentication Manager to passively gather behavioral data such as IP, browser type, geolocation, and device ID to build user risk profiles. This is essential for enabling risk-based authentication (RBA) and triggering step-up authentication when anomalies are detected. It does not tokens D or support anonymous auth. A. Default security questions. C. Relate to self-service, not TROBI. A SOS risk-based authentication implementation guide stresses the importance of silent collection in proactive security. Question 11. In what ways can a misconfigured identity source affect token-based authentication attempts? The RSA Authentication Manager 8.0 for users imported from an external LDAP directory. A. Authentication attempts may fail due to missing user attributes required for policy evaluation. B. Tokens become deactivated and require resynchronization before reuse. C. PIN policies are disabled for those users until the source is validated. D. Identity routers automatically switch to emergency mode for fallback. Answer. Correct answer A. Authentication attempts may fail due to missing user attributes required for policy evaluation. Explanation. When identity sources such as LDAP are misconfigured or fail to deliver expected user attributes, e.g., username, UID, authentication policies may not be evaluated correctly, resulting in failed logins. RSA Authentication Manager heavily relies on identity source integration to resolve users and enforce policies. Token resynchronization B is unrelated to identity source errors. PIN policies C are not dynamically disabled, and emergency mode D is not an automatic function of identity routers. Refer to our SOS Identity Source Configuration Guide. Question 12. While examining the deployment of RSA Authentication Manager 8.0 in a high availability environment, an administrator discovers that failover doesn't occur during primary instance outage. What's the most probable root cause? A. The replica instance was not promoted to handle administrative tasks. B. Replication latency exceeds the configured alert threshold. C. Network firewall rules block a port 5500 between primary and replica. D. Identity source connection timeouts are incorrectly set. Answer. Correct answer. C. Network firewall rules block up port 5500 between primary and replica. Explanation. RSA authentication manager uses up port 5500 for communication between the primary and replica instances. If this port is blocked, the replica cannot detect the primary's status and will fail to take over services during failover scenario. Administrative role promotion A does not imp replication. Replication latency B might cause delays, but not complete failover failure. Identity source timeouts D unrelated to internal failover mechanisms. See the RSA High Availability Deployment Guide for network prerequisites. Question 13. From multiple perspectives, what is a benefit of using Security Console over Self-Service Console for managing user authentications in RSA Authentication Manager 8.0? A. It provides users with on-demand passcodes. B. It allows administrators to manually assign tokens to users. C. It enables biometric fallback authentication. D. It lets users update their own PIN without assistance. Answer. Correct answer. B. It allows administrators to manually assign tokens to users. Explanation. The Security Console is an administrative interface used by RSA admins to perform tasks like token assignment, user status management, and administrative role delegation. Self-Service Console is primarily for user-initiated actions, such as updating PINs or requesting new tokens. Biometric fallback C is not natively part. RSA Authentication Manager RSA's console comparison matrix clearly delineates that token assignment is an administrative privilege handled through the Security Console. Question 14. The underlying principle of configuring agent hosts correctly in RSA Authentication Manager 8.0 includes which of the following best practices? A. Allowing anonymous agents to bypass authentication policy checks. B. Ensuring the agent's IP or hostname matches its entry in the RSA database. C. Disabling auditing logs to reduce storage overhead. D. Configuring agents with wildcard IP ranges to cover multiple devices. Answer. Correct answer. B. Ensuring the agent's IP or hostname matches its entry in the RSA database. Explanation. Agent host records must accurately match the IP address or ENS name used by the authentication agent to communicate with RSA Authentication Manager. If there's mismatch, the system may fail to associate the request, leading to silent authentication failures. Wildcarding D violates RSA's security configure guidelines, and bypassing authentication or disabling logging AC undermines core security principles and traceability. Refer to the RSA agent host configuration best practices. Question 15. A critical examination of token expiration policies the RSA Authentication Manager 8.0 reveals a common risk. What issue may arise if administrators do not proactively monitor and replace expiring tokens? A. Authentication traffic will be automatically redirected to emergency authentication servers. B. Tokens will auto-renew in silent mode but lose PIN synchronization. C. Users will be unable to authenticate once the token seed record becomes invalid. D. Authentication Manager will auto-convert expiring tokens into software licenses. Answer. Correct answer. C. Users will be unable to authenticate once the token seed record becomes invalid. Explanation. RSA tokens, both hardware and software, depend on seed records that have expiration dates. Once expired, the token becomes non-functional, preventing user authentication. There is no auto-renewal or conversion process, B or D, and no redirection to emergency services, A. RSA's Token Lifecycle Management Guide emphasizes tracking expiration and replacing tokens proactively to maintain uninterrupted service. Question 16. Taking into account the configuration of authentication policies, which of the following defines a correct use case for implementing risk-based authentication (RBA) within RSA Authentication Manager 8.0? A. Enforcing op usage only during working hours. B. Allowing access from unmanaged devices without tokens. C. Requiring additional authentication factors during anomalous login behavior. D. Automatically assigning software tokens upon new user creation. Answer. Correct answer. C. Requiring additional authentication factors during anomalous login behavior. Explanation. Or B. RSA Authentication Manager is designed to evaluate user behavior, G. Location, device, time, and determine risk scores. If behavior is deemed risky, the system enforces step-up authentication, such as requiring a token or additional factor. This approach is aligned with Zero Trust principles and is detailed. RSA's Risk-Based Authentication Framework Guide. Automatically assigning tokens, D, and device access, B, are unrelated, and working hour enforcement, A, is different policy layer. Question 17. From a historical standpoint, Mr. Laurent is configuring a backup strategy for RSA Authentication Manager 8.0. He intends to support full system recovery in the event of corruption. What should be included in the backup to ensure complete restoration? A. Only the token C files and identity source configurations. B. All system logs and administrative audit trails. C. The entire system configuration including database and license files. D. Replication settings and SSL certificates only. Answer. Correct answer. C. The entire system configuration including database and license files. Explanation. For full restoration, backups must include system configuration files, the internal database license files, and certificate stores. RSA's Disaster Recovery Planning Guide mandates these components for complete system restore, especially in production deployments. Logs, B, help audits, but aren't sufficient for recovery. Seed files, A, and replication settings, D, are partial components, but don't enable full functionality restoration. Question 18. The prevailing attitude toward using multiple identity sources. The RSA Authentication Manager 8.0 is generally supportive, but which challenge may arise if priority ordering is incorrectly configured? A. Users may be authenticated against fallback radius servers. B. Duplicate usernames from low priority sources may override valid users. C. Token assignments become permanently locked to the highest priority source. D. Group membership attributes fail to propagate across sources. Answer. Correct answer. B. Duplicate usernames from low priority sources may override valid users. Explanation. RSA Authentication Manager uses priority ordering to resolve users across identity sources. If the user exists in multiple sources, the first match in priority is used, possibly causing authentication to fail or apply the wrong policies. This issue is well documented in RSA's Multi-Source Identity Integration Guide. Fallback to radius A is unrelated, and tokens aren't permanently locked by source. C. Group attributes. D. Are handled per source context. Question 19. Given the circumstances where a token is frequently out of sync, Mr. Nash suspects time drift. The RSA Authentication Manager 8.0. What is the best corrective action? A. Extend the window of allowed failed authentication attempts. B. Use the built-in resynchronization function to recalibrate the token. C. Delete and reissue the token with a new seed record. D. Just the PIN policy to accept fixed-length codes. Answer. Correct answer. B. Use the built-in resynchronization function to recalibrate the token. Explanation. Tokens may fall out of sync due to clock drift or repeated failed attempts. RSA Authentication Manager provides a resynchronization feature which allows an admin to end two successive token codes from the user to realign the system and token clock. Reissuing a token C is more disruptive and unnecessary in most cases. PIN policy adjustments D do not fix sync issues. Refer to the Token Management and Resynchronization Guide. Question 20. Contrary to popular belief, authentication failure in RSA Authentication Manager 8.0 is not always caused by incorrect user input. Which of the following backend misconfigurations can simulate a user failure scenario? A. Incorrectly mapped user groups to administrative roles. B. Expired SSL certificate for self-service console. C. Token expiration dates set in the past. D. Over-provisioning of tokens beyond licensing limit. Answer. Correct answer. C. Token expiration date set in the past. Explanation. If a token's expiration date is in the past, RSA Authentication Manager treats any authentication attempt as invalid, mimicking user input errors e.g. incorrect op. This causes confusion unless thoroughly investigated. SSA expiration b would affect UI access, not token validation. Admin role mappings A and token over-provisioning D don't directly trigger failed authentications. See the RSA Token Lifecycle Management section for expiration-related issues. Question 21. To what extent does silent collection impact the accuracy of risk-based authentication (RBA) decisions? The RSA Authentication Manager 8.0. A. It allows immediate token issuance without identity verification. B. It strengthens RBA decisions by collecting user behavior data silently. C. It disables op usage when risk levels are deemed low. D. It permits user account modification without administrative oversight. Answer. Correct answer. B. It strengthens RBA decisions by collecting user behavior data silently. Explanation. Silent collection is essential in RBA because it gathers data without user interruption, such as device fingerprinting, geolocation, and IP behavior. RSA Authentication Manager uses this data to build behavioral baselines and determine anomalies in login patterns. This is a foundational aspect of the RSA risk engine as described in the RBA Implementation Guide. Options A, C, and D represent misinterpretations of RBA capabilities. Question 22. By evaluating failed authentications across a distributed enterprise, Mr. Santos observes a pattern: users connected to a particular VPN gateway are consistently rejected despite having valid tokens. What should be his first administrative action? A. Delete and reissue all used tokens. B. Verify the agent-host configuration for the VPN gateway and Authentication Manager. C. Reboot the RSA Authentication Manager server to clear cache. D. Update all users' pins manually through the security console. Answer. Correct answer. B. Verify the agent-host configuration for the VPN gateway and Authentication Manager. Explanation. The agent-host configuration in RSA Authentication Manager must match the IP address or hostname of the authenticating system. If a gateway is misconfigured or not registered as an agent host, RSA Authentication Manager will not recognize or respond to its requests, even for valid tokens. Tokened A and PIN resets D are unnecessary. Rebooting the server C will not resolve host-level configuration issues. See the Agent Host Configuration Guide for best practices. Question 23. The question remains whether token resynchronization is necessary in environments using software tokens on mobile devices. Under what condition does RSA recommend manual resynchronization? A. When users switch devices but retain the same token seed. B. When authentication failures occur consistently due to time drift. C. When identity routers are updated to a newer firmware version. D. When SSL certificates are renewed in the self-service console. Answer. Correct answer. B. When authentication failures occur consistently due to time drift. Explanation. Software tokens, particularly on mobile devices, can fall out of sync due to device time changes or application issues. RSA Authentication Manager includes a manual token resynchronization process which realigns the server's expected time window with the token's output. Switching devices A typically requires reissuance. SSL certificates D and IDA firmware C do not affect token synchronization. Reference: Token Administration and Resynchronization Best Practices. Question 24. With the advent of hybrid cloud environments, organizations often integrate both RSA Authentication Manager and RSA Cloud Authentication Service (CAS). What must administrators ensure to maintain consistent user access policies? A. Configure multi-domain trust relationships between RSA servers. B. Replicate hardware tokens across on-premises and cloud systems. C. Align access policies and identity source configurations across both platforms. D. Replace all hardware tokens with software tokens for compatibility. Answer. Correct answer. C. Align access policies and identity source configurations across both platforms. Explanation. To maintain consistency between RSA Authentication Manager and CAS, policies and identity sources must be aligned manually as they do not share automatic synchronization. Misalignment leads to inconsistent authentication outcomes across on-premises and cloud applications. Replacing tokens D is not necessary, and multi-domain trust A is not an RSA configuration method. Replicating tokens B is also not supported. Refer to the RSA Hybrid Architecture Deployment Guide. Question 25. Research indicates that a failure in radius communication often results in authentication timeouts. Which of the following most likely causes this issue in RSA Authentication Manager 8.0? A software token version mismatch with the mobile app. B. A corrupted backup of the internal database. C. An incorrect shared secret between RSA and the Radius client. D. A misconfigured group membership policy for emergency access. Answer. Correct answer. C. An incorrect shared secret between RSA and the Radius client. Explanation. The shared secret is a critical part of the Radius protocol. If it's mismatched between the RSA Authentication Manager and the Radius client, e.g., e-communication will fail silently or result in timeouts. This is emphasized in RSA's Radius Configuration Guide, which requires shared secret parity for secure communication. Versions A and group policies D don't directly affect Radius connectivity. Database backup B is unrelated unless restoration is in progress. Question 26. The core principles of user management in RSA Authentication Manager include assigning administrative roles responsibly. What is the best practice when delegating administrative access? A. Assign super admin roles to all support staff for operational continuity. B. Use default admin credentials for shared access. C. Restrict access using role-based privileges tied to security domains. D. Allow password resets without authentication for convenience. Answer. Correct answer. C. Restrict access using role-based privileges tied to security domains. Explanation. RSA Authentication Manager supports granular delegation through role-based access control, RBAC, and security domains. Assigning minimal necessary privileges ensures least privilege principles critical for audit and compliance. Granting super admin roles broadly A or sharing credentials B is against RSA security guidelines. Allowing unauthenticated resets D introduces serious vulnerabilities. See the RSA Administrative Role Configuration Guide. Question 27. The development of RSA Authentication Manager's bulk operations allows for efficient user and token management. Which condition must be met to perform successful bulk token assignment? A. All users must already have administrative roles. B. Users must exist and be resolvable in an identity source. C. The system must operate in emergency access mode. D. Tokens must already be assigned to user groups. Answer. Correct answer. B. Users must exist and be resolvable in an identity source. Explanation. For bulk operations like token assignment to succeed, RSA Authentication Manager must be able to resolve each user through a linked identity source, e.g. LDAP or Active Directory. If users are not found, assignments will fail. Admin roles A are not needed for recipients. Emergency mode C is for bypassing authentication, not provisioning. Tokens are assigned to users, not groups directly. Reference RSA Bulk Maintenance Operations Guide. Question 20. Historically speaking, RSA Authentication Manager separates its services using administrative interfaces. What is a primary difference between the Operations Console and the Security Console? A. The Operations Console handles real-time authentication logs. B. The Security Console is used exclusively for appliance upgrades. C. The Operations Console is for system-level configuration and replication setup. D. The Security Console manages server network interfaces. Answer. Correct answer. C. The Operations Console is for system-level configuration and replication setup. Explanation. The Operations Console is designed for system-level tasks like replica management, system backups, license activation, and network configuration. Meanwhile, the Security Console is focused on user management, token assignment, and access policy configuration. Confusing the two can lead to administrative errors. This distinction is fundamental in the RSA administrative interface architecture. Question 29. Examining the consequences of mismanaged passcodes, Istaloon notices an uptick in help desk tickets for failed logins. Users complain of invalid PIN messages despite recently resetting their credentials. What administrative misconfiguration is the most likely cause? A. PIN format policy conflicts with token device limitations. B. Identity source was updated without a restart of Authentication Manager. C. User group policy restricts passcode reuse frequency. D. Self-service console timeout was misconfigured. Answer. Correct answer A. PIN format policy conflicts with token device limitations. Explanation. RSA Authentication Manager enforces PIN format policies and certain token devices have limitations e.g. max length or character type. If the PIN policy allows formats that are incompatible with the user's token type, authentication fails. Group policy restrictions C and timeouts D may affect usability but not validity. Restarting Authentication Manager B isn't required after identity source updates. See RSA token and PIN compatibility guidelines. Question 30. In the absence of centralized audit logging, what is the primary risk for RSA Authentication Manager deployments across multiple locations? A. Inability to resynchronize tokens across time zones. B. Increased software token expiration rates. C. Fragmented visibility into authentication events and policy violations. D. Reduced ability to issue temporary passwords remotely. Answer. Correct answer. C. Fragmented visibility into authentication events and policy violations. Explanation. Without centralized audit logging, RSA Authentication Manager deployments lose unified visibility into user behavior, failed logins, token misuse, or policy violations across sites. This impacts compliance, security auditing, and incident response, resynchronization A, token expiration B, and password issuance D. Unrelated to audit visibility, refer to RSA logging and audit infrastructure recommendations.